self-destruct sequence is online.
In this video, I am going to build a startup button box for Drake ships for Star Citizen. And this video is not about having a laugh at Drake. Okay, this video is not just about having a laugh at Drake. This will be actually my first Arduino Button Box project. So I wanted to start with something simple, and I'm just going to build a one button box, in this case, and I wanted to make it with a twist. So the first step in a project like this was to find the perfect button for starting up the ship, and that's why I have this. This is something I pick up from the kind of local military surplus company, and this is actually authentic ex-Soviet missile launch button. And a disclaimer, the company I bought this from has bought this ages ago. So at this point, only thing I'm supporting is a local business. Okay, so stick around if you want to see a fun build project or actually want to learn how to get started with Arduino button boxes for Star Citizen. First, I again made the design with Fusion 360, and as always, I'll try to have the 3D model available for you to download somewhere. The box is rather large since the switch is large, and also I want to be able to stuff wires easily inside. And then it was time for printing. For some reason the box itself got warped, even though the raft sticks to the printer's bed. I don't know what happened, but this was the moment I went to Bambu Labs website and ordered their P1P. So this basically ended up being my last project with my Ender 3 V2. Still, the bottom part came out nicely, though the raft was quite unnecessary here. But fun thing with this project is that I can screw stuff up and just say, well, it's Drake. And I'll be doing that often enough in this project. The pillar inside the box is not just an extra support, but I also added a threaded inside there so I can use it to keep the box closed. Now that the case is finished, we can move on to the electrics. And to build an Arduino button box, you're going to need, surprisingly enough, an Arduino or Arduino clone. This one is Arduino micro clone, and for your PC to recognize your button box as a controller, you need to use Arduino's Joystick Library. This requires you to use 32U4 based Arduino like Leonardo or Micro. Leonardo is probably better for prototyping, but Micro can actually fit inside your box. Next, the button. This one is quite simple. On the other side, the blade is touching the terminal when you're not pressing the button. This is the normally closed side. And the other side is normally open, what I'm going to use here. I'm going to connect one wire to the ground pin into Arduino and another wire to pin number 2. If you add more buttons, connect other side to the ground and the other side to other pins like 3, 4 and so on. You can also use analog pins for buttons, but those you can also use stuff like potentiometers, basically stuff with axes. For even more buttons you could create a matrix, but that's not in the scope of this video. But just a button would be boring, not really authentic Drake experience. So I decided to add few things. I'll use one circuit, but I'll have to tie these wires that go outside the box from the holes, and also I'm going to add this micro switch you will need to press down with the screwdriver. Now we're closer to a Drake experience, but there will be more. I decided to start the assembly with the most difficult part, at least for me, soldering the wires into my Arduino Micro. I'm not good at soldering, and this is probably the smallest thing I ever soldered in my life. A smart person would have probably practiced a bit, but oh well. Surprisingly enough, I managed to pull it off. And on the side note, this project made me realize that I actually might need reading glasses. And this is a really good time to make sure that the thing is working. I'll get to the coding part a bit later in more details. Then I just continued the assembly and also made sure that I had long enough wires to work comfortably. I can always stuff them inside the box since there's enough space. The button itself was easy, just unscrewed the screws, inserted the wire and then screwed it back. And this micro switch was easy to solder, just had to make sure that I used the normally open pin. Also, heat sinks do probably won't hurt here. And again, a good place to test that the thing is working. I printed this Arduino micro holder and decided to attach it with hot glue. Apparently there was some golden glitter glue left after my wife, but it did the job, at least I thought so. Once it was working, I just had to stuff everything inside the box and attaching the button and the micro switch. So at this point I realized that I should have actually attached the wires towards the side, not down. But in case like this, use the force, literally. And occasionally I get some disturbances from my younger son. Also, we could have few words about the tolerances when adding holes into your 3D design. The issue was that I really didn't take into account the size of my micro USB cable and also how much space the Arduino holder would take inside the box. So I ended up doing some fine tuning. Now I want to emphasize that don't do this sort of project late when you're tired. I decided that screw it and eventually just use superglue, but something ended up creating a short circuit and the button would end up being pressed accidentally. So after everything I pried this Arduino off, and it's a good thing it's only a clone that cost me a couple of euros, and resoldered the wires to a new board and attached it later with just tape. Good enough for a Drake box. And after putting everything together, final test. I also decided to add some details, so this would probably have worked better if I had proper painting gear for more detailed work, but it's, well, you know. I still felt something was missing though, and then I realized what it was. Now the build part was ready. As the physical build is ready, it's time to talk about code. And just a disclaimer, I'm not a developer. I actually do marketing for my living, so just to know where we're at. Just don't make too much fun of my code, okay? Also, this won't be a kind of Arduino beginner's guide. YouTube is already full of those really good guides, so if you want to start from the beginning, start with those. And a reminder, after installing the Joystick Library, you can always use the examples for reference. They can be found from here and examples and joystick. But I'll go through here just kind of basic stuff how the button box works. First, I have a here really simple version of the sketch for just one button. After the basic Joystick Library settings here, like how many buttons we have, axes and so on, and basic variables, we define the pin here that we use for the button in the setup part here. I'm not going into the details of how these things work, but with all sorts of buttons, you want to use either pull up or pull down resistor. And since the Arduino has a pull up resistor built in, that's what we're using here. What you need to remember is with pull up resistor, when the circuit is open, it returns high, and when it's closed, it returns low. So basically, just the opposite of that's what you might expect. And how this works is the loop here, it monitors if you're pressing the button and compares it to the previous state of the button right here. So if you haven't been pressing the button and don't press it, it skips the if condition and does nothing. If the state of the button is different than previously, aka you now press the button, it goes into this if condition here and tells the PC that the button is pressed and changes the last value of button. Again, as long as you keep pressing the button, nothing happens until you release the button, and then the button value is again different than the last time, and it goes into this if condition and sends information for your PC that the button has been released. For multiple buttons, you would use a for loop here, and you can find example of this from the example called joystick button. But the Drake startup button, where pressing the button would always do what you expect it to do. So where's the fun in that? So for the next iteration, I added this variable called random Drake here. And what it does, that it can get the value between 0 and 9, and I configured 3 buttons, but still 1 physical button. So in practice, there's basically 60% chance to press button 1. Let's say this will start to ship. 30% chance to press button 2, which let's say can open the doors. And 10% chance press button 3, which can, let's say, initiate the self-destruct. But this naturally doesn't work like this. When I press button, it might randomize that I pressed button 1, but when I release the button, it randomizes it again and might tell the PC that the button 2 needs to be released, leaving the button 1 pressed. So for the third iteration, I made it so that it executes a bit different code depending if the button is pressed or released, and randomizes it only when the button is actually pressed for the first time here. It also uses the same randomized value when releasing the button. And for the final iteration, I added lots of comments, so if you'd like to try this one out, it might help you. Or if you just want to take your time and understand what on earth I actually did here. And since both options in this if condition share mostly the same code, besides the randomizer, I made them into this function called randomizer Drake here. I don't know much about development, but I would expect that some actual developers really love my naming scheme with variable called random Drake and a function called randomizer Drake. But I'll upload this code somewhere so you can laugh at it at your own pace. And as we can see, there are actually 3 different buttons this time. Okay, and now I think we can test this thing out. So first thing, I'll need to tie this down together somehow. Then I need to find the micro switch inside and push it down and then press the button. And as you can see, it actually randomizes the result here. Next we need to set stuff in game, and for this I decided to stay with my desktop setup and not start the full cockpit yet. So first thing, let's make the most difficult one and hit the self-destruct. The funny thing is, since I don't have joystick library here, this might take I don't know how many attempts. Let's see. So, oh, that was the first attempt. Oh yeah, that was good luck. Then we could go for open the doors. We need the button 2 for this. Oh yes, I'm on the roll. And then finally flight/systems ready. Do we get number 1? Oh, this was too perfect. Just too perfect. Okay, it's finally time to test this thing with the game. And in this case, I started up Arduino Commander and came to Freelight with the Cutlass Black and just landed down. And there was a small thing that I have to make here, small change, because I realized that self-destruct doesn't work if the power is off. So I kind of changed it that the button 1 turns the engines on, which are currently off, as you might see from the screen capture. So let's try out and what happens. Let's find the micro switch and power on.
Engines offline.
Okay, so that toggled the doors, I guess.
Self-destruct sequence is
Oopsie. Okay, that was a silly little project, but the main idea was to build something with Arduino and for me to learn to use the Joystick Library. And I think I managed to accomplish that one. So if you actually want to know what I'm going to build from Arduino and you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe. And anyway, thanks for watching and hope to see you next time.